Thank you everyone for joining me here today. My name is Sean Barron with Gooroo, and I'm joined by Martha McPhee. Martha, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. I love Gooroo, and I'm
Thank
thrilled to participate.
Oh, thank you very much. We appreciate you having us here. I'm sure many of you know who are joining us. For those of you who do not, Martha is an American novelist. She just published her fifth book, An Elegant Woman, so it's a perfect time to have her on. So we very much appreciate it, Martha. Thank you. I'm sure this is a crazy time for you.
You're welcome. I think it's a crazy time for everyone.
I think you might be right on that. I certainly think so.
Worldwide.
So Martha, I'm always curious. Many of the young students who are joining us today might be interested in becoming our authors. I know at one point with myself, when I was 14, 15, I was carrying around a notebook and trying to write my own novel, which was a mess, and I quickly realized it wasn't for me. But when did you first know that this was something you wanted to pursue?
As a child, I kept journals too. I was not very good at being descriptive in these journals or expansive, but I did keep them. My mother encouraged me early on. I come from a family of artists and writers, and from a young age, I didn't show a lot of excellence in school. So my mother was always looking for ways for me to uh, explore myself, and keeping a journal was one of them. And we had a sort of big crazy family, and she thought it would be interesting for me to try to write about the family, and I've been doing that ever since in one way or another. But I will also add that keeping the journals, writing teaches writing, and by keeping these journals, I started to develop a voice in a way, and an understanding of what I wanted to explore. And when I got to high school and was still not really a terrific student with the critical essay, didn't speak to my strength. I had a wonderful teacher who supported me in my creative endeavors. And I love to acknowledge her, Merle Rose, because I think behind so many successes in individuals, there's a great teacher, a guiding light, someone who encourages us and sees something that we might not necessarily see in ourselves and helps pull it out. Once she allowed me to do creative writing in her English class, I understood what it was I needed to do in life, even though it took me time to develop the confidence and much more time reading and writing.
That's fantastic. One of the things we certainly focus here at Gooroo is finding mentors that you can look up to and learn from them. So that's great to hear. Out of curiosity, do you still have those notebooks, and have you ever gone back to read some of your earliest writings?
I do. I do. The early ones are, I'm trying to interpret my family through princes and princesses, and they're very, they're very simple. But I've kept them. I kept them from when I was very little, right on through my early years as a novelist. And I do go back, and they are interesting. I've gone back recently to because somebody was interested in me doing something with them, so I wanted to see what was inside of them. And yeah, it was. I see the efforts, and I see the struggles, and I see that I'm still grappling with some of the same stuff, even though I'm more mature as a writer. It's a lifelong pursuit. It's not something you master and then it's easy. It's a lifelong pursuit, and the journals help me see that.
Yeah, I think that's a great message that, starting off to where you start to where you end up with your fifth novel, that it is a progression and that it's something you can always get better at. Out of curiosity, what are some of the authors that sort of inspired you throughout your life? Who do you look at as sort of an old friend or an inspiration?
Wow, there are a lot. So contemporary novelists, Mona Simpson, Edna O'Brien, those two women, those two writers made me feel like I could do this. They made me, I was more steeped in the classics like most kids coming out of high school. And the idea of becoming a novelist felt like a very remote possibility, because here you have these classics that have endured centuries in time, and they're daunting models. But then I saw what these women were doing, and others along the way, and it made me really feel like I had a story to tell, and mine was legitimate. So those two. But in terms of classics, I love Edith Wharton. She explores themes that are important to me: social mobility, trying to navigate the world with big ambition and little resources. That's a theme, an abiding theme of mine. Theodore Dreiser, some of the same thematic parallels: Sister Carrie and American Tragedy. And then George Eliot's Middlemarch is a book I return to over and over again. So those are some. Thomas Hardy, I love Thomas Hardy. I just, for the landscape, for the descriptions of the landscape as a character, and his forlorn characters, they can be sort of dark and depressing, but I absolutely love the quality of his prose.
It's fantastic. And have you found that you've taken different things from books as you go back to them over the years? I know there's certain books that I read when I was in high school, in middle school, and they were a great read. And then when I go back in later in life and reread them now, there are certain themes that I didn't pick up on, or even just taking a different perspective on it just now that I've progressed in my own life.
Right. Well, when you mature, you see things in a different way. You understand, the finiteness of life in a way that you don't when you're younger. You understand, you just become wiser, right? The old maxim, youth is wasted on the young. But yes, the most recently, to turn to a concrete example, I reread Pale Horse, Pale Rider. It's a novella by Catherine Ann Porter. And I've read that 3 or 4 times. And it concerns the flu epidemic of 1918. And I brought it with me. I'm in New Jersey. I live in New York City, but we came down here, my children and my husband and I, to my mother's home to take care of her during the pandemic, and also so we wouldn't be in a small apartment. But that was the one book I brought with me from New York. There's an incredible library here, but I brought that one because I wanted to reread it. I've read it, like I said, maybe 3 or 4 times, but I wanted to reread it in the midst of this pandemic to see how it spoke to me. And it spoke to me in a completely new way, because I'm living, like all of us, through scary times. And in that novella, the character has the flu and is almost dying in a hospital, and it's like a fever dream the way she tells the story. And she wrote that 20 years after, so you do need that kind of perspective. But it was helpful as a writer, but helpful to me as a reader, to look at how she was looking at going through what we are going through collectively right now.
Definitely an interesting time to pick that back up, for sure.
Yeah, and I didn't have the same connection when I read it the 3 other times. I loved it, but I didn't have that deep, visceral understanding of the experience, but also how you need time and perspective to be able to look back on something.
Absolutely. And speaking about the times we're living in now, I think there's even more of a focus on technology. Now, I mean, we're connecting virtually. And so I was curious to get your perspective on ebooks and audiobooks. That's sort of a big thing for the younger generations. I know I don't go anywhere without my Kindle or, without audiobooks downloaded on my phone when I travel. So I'm curious to get your perspective. And do you think anything's lost when you don't have a physical book and you're just looking at an app on your phone or an
Look,
audio?
as Faulkner said, read anything. Read comics, read romances, read trash, read classics, read. So whatever device is allowing a person to read is good in my book. I personally love my Kindle, which is my phone basically, for classics for some reason. And I like the hardcover, the paperback for contemporary books. And maybe it's just that I want to support bookstores and authors who are going to benefit. So I do it that way. But yeah, I mean, anything that gets you reading. When I run, I like to listen to a book, and I feel that sometimes I miss a bit, but so it's not for me my preferred method, but again, whatever gets people listening to books is and stimulating their imagination. There have been many studies that reading creates empathy, and we can all do with more of that. So I'm pro.
I actually find the same thing with audiobooks where I will lose focus and then we'll have to rewind and try to figure out where I was previously.
Yeah.
We need to go back.
Yeah.
Curious to since we have a younger audience, what advice would you have for young students who are interested in becoming a writer or struggle writing? You know, what are some of the things you can draw from your own experiences
Yeah.
as you were talking about your progression as a writer, and what would you
Right.
share with them?
Well, to keep a journal. And right now more than ever, and also I don't think you need to even want to be a writer to keep a journal. But if you do want to be a writer, it's a safe place where you can explore and develop your voice. Like I said earlier, I wasn't a good student initially. I became a very good student, I should add. But initially,
If your son is watching, you were a very
yeah,
good student.
exactly. I was a good student. But initially I wasn't, and I needed to find who I was. And I needed to find it in a more dramatic way than the large percentage of students who are more, it's just easier for them. And keeping a journal really helped me. And I see in looking back at these journals, not so much from a very young age, but high school, or it's starting in high school, I'm really trying to find my voice and sort it out. And I'm trying on narrative. I'm trying to tell stories. And I think it's the safe place that you can do that. So I highly recommend it. And having a journal that you actually like. I have mine right here. It's always with me. It's this soft cover notebook and lined, and I have a pen that I love to use, just this Uniball pen. But it's this place I love to go to. But also reading. If writing teaches writing, reading teaches writing. And as Faulkner again said, read anything. It doesn't really matter. Just read. And find what you love, and that's going to lead you inevitably to better and better books. It works like that. And then discipline. If you're already knowing that you want to be a storyteller, you need a time where you sit down at your spot and you write, even if you're just thinking for the hour that you give yourself or whatever time frame it is. So discipline, writing, reading, and then understanding that there's a lot of failure that comes with this career. So develop a thick skin and a determination. Those are my tips.
Thank you for sharing. When you're preparing to write a book, you have your notebooks, you have your notes. I'm curious of what your outline process is. Where do you get started, and then maybe how has that progressed throughout the years? I believe I saw in an interview you said An Elegant Woman was always the book you wanted to write, and then you had started in the past and it just wasn't the right time. So I'm curious how your sort of process has changed throughout the years.
The process hasn't probably changed too much, but the understanding that every writer has her own process has. Early on, I would think, I'm not doing it right. I should be doing it this way. I should have a better outline. I should know what I want to say. I should be sitting at my desk for 12 hours a day instead of 2. I shouldn't be working at a job, even though I need a job. All of these things I would be punishing myself. And that's just a waste of time. Skip that and understand that every writer has a process. So mine is that I get up early and I work as long as I can. And I usually write in my journal at first and try to sort out a scene that I'm working on. And I read a bit, something that's grabbing me and making me want to write. Right now, it happens to be a novel called Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli, which is fabulous. But in terms of the actual writing, my novels have always begun inadvertently with a question, something I'm asking myself. How do we love somebody who's abused us? Which is stronger, cross-cultural love or love of one's patria, one country? How do you live a life across a century? These kinds of questions are the initial motivators, and then I burrow in. And sometimes I have a structure in mind. Often it's helpful to have a structure, but somebody said, I can't remember right now the writer that said it, but he said that writing a novel is like driving in a thick fog at night with the high beams on. You're feeling your way really slowly, and that is my process. And I also had a professor once who said, make an outline, but feel free to stray from it. And every time I've tried to make an outline, I've strayed from it. But I've heard writers have very, very, very detailed outlines, and they work that way. So that's their process. Mine's the thick fog and at night with my high beams on.
With those questions you're trying to answer, do you have can we get a sneak peek on what you're trying to answer next, or do you have an idea?
In the next novel?
The next novel?
Yeah, it's I'm trying, it's two things. I'm again looking at memory, because it's the story of a woman who is who's telling her mother her lifelong love story because she has dementia. So I'm looking at the question of memory and who do the stories belong to once that memory fades. But it's also it's a biracial love story that spans 50, 60 years, a lifetime really. And so I'm looking at that too. In she's white and he's Jamaican.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Breaking on Gooroo Masterclass.
Breaking news.
I wanted to go back to something you mentioned previously, and it was about failure being part of the process. And one of the themes in Dear Money was sort of reinventing your image and who you are. So I was hoping you can dive a little bit more into that. Is this something you've tried to do yourself and would recommend doing?
It's not anything I've ever tried to do myself, but Dear Money began with a proposition, an actual proposition. Somebody said to me, he was a trader at Goldman Sachs, and I was interested in what he did. He was a bond trader, and I could see, it was 2004, I could see houses, going up, churches turning into houses, hospitals turning into houses. And so I was interested in, he was a mortgage-backed securities trader. And so I asked him about it, and he said, it's nothing, anybody can do it. We're just used car salesmen. It's no big deal. You could do it. And I loved that there was this sort of Pygmalion story, the idea of being transformed, My Fair Lady, like from the starving artist into the high-powered bond trader. And I think that if I had been really tenacious and a different kind of person, I may well have taken him up on that offer. But instead, I went to my notebook and turned it into a novel, which is the way I do my transformations.
Okay. And then for An Elegant Woman, it's a very personal story for you. It centers around the stories your grandmother told you. I believe at the beginning of the book, you have a phrase, every history is a song, and this is what ours sounds like, which is gorgeous. So I was curious, is it sort of a different tone when you're writing about something so personal to you? And then how do you feel? Is it a different feeling when you're sharing that with your family for the first time and they're seeing, you putting some of these themes, into words?
Well, I always try to get my students to inhabit their stories, to claim them and tell them in a fictional way. There is a translation that happens, and when you take it from your family life, my first novel looked at my childhood, but there's a transforming process when you're doing it as fiction and not as memoir, and um, it becomes something else. You don't have to adhere to fact, and you're not trying to sort out or make peace with or explore in the way that a memoir would do. Your allegiance is really to the storytelling, and in that allegiance to the storytelling, big truths might remain the same, an honest emotion, but the story, it takes on its own life. And so it's a process of translation and transformation. So I never feel this with An Elegant Woman. I did use my grandmother's stories so much as the jumping off point for this book, but I didn't. But it's not something that's new to me. My family is familiar with it. I'm not in this to reveal big dark family secrets. I'm in it to explore bit other themes, and you need to partly why I couldn't do this when I was younger. An Elegant Woman was I just didn't understand so much what it means to be part of generations of determined women. I was more myopic. I was more looking at the immediacy of my life and not what life means over time or what it means to make a life. So no, it's a translation process, and I'd say every writer is autobiographical in one way or another. Some are looking more specifically and directly at their experience because that's who they are as storytellers, and some translate it into sci-fi, and it's much further removed, or horror or whatever. But ultimately, deep down, as Flaubert said, Emma Bovary, c'est moi. Emma Bovary is me, is I, or whatever the correct grammar is for that. I am Emma Bovary. And so we have to be all of our characters, and we have to find ourselves in all of those characters, whether that character is my grandmother or my great-grandmother, or somebody in the novel who's completely invented, of which there are more than a few.
Is it a different feeling when you're releasing this book to the world, when it's something that you've wanted to do for so long, or do you find you have that personal connection with everything you write?
Well, I have that personal connection with everything I write, but this one I've been very determined to ask for help, because spreading the word, because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Things were rough on publishers, on independent bookstores. So I decided that I would, and I love this book, so I decided I would create a grassroots movement for my book all on my own, which is very new for me. I've never done that before. And I asked friends and friends and distant friends and family. I have a big family to help me spread the word, and they did, and they've been really loving the book. There's been a great reception, and it's in a third printing. And she told a friend who told a friend who told another friend. Grassroots campaign is working. So I'm so grateful to myself for being bold, but also, of course, to everyone who's helping me.
Absolutely. Well, it's worked out for us. I'm glad you could take the time to meet with us today. The question I'd like to leave you with everything going on in the world, with protesting and the coronavirus and everything else, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges for students? And then what would your advice be as they try to work through that?
So I have two students. I have a high school sophomore, rising junior, and a rising junior in college as well. And these are challenging times, and I've gone, and I'm a professor. My husband's a professor, my father's a professor, all my sisters are academics in one form or another, and artists. And so we're steeped in it. And so I'm seeing different models for going back to school. And at the beginning, I thought, we're on a farm, let's just raise chickens for a year. And of course, that's very privileged, and it's also just not realistic. I think we have to limp forward and stay focused, stay disciplined. The institutions that we're a part of, whether as students or as professionals, whether it's Gooroo or Hofstra University, that we help our students make it the most rewarding and rich experience it can be, because we need our intellectual lives to expand and to grow and to be stimulated. And it was easy in the beginning to collapse into this and wait for the snowstorm to be over, but this is going to be with us for a while. So we have to figure out how to move forward as imperfectly and as creatively as we possibly can. And for those students who are interested in creative writing, this is a real and the humanities in general, and math and everything. It takes great creative thinking skills, and we should be honing those, figuring out who we are can contribute to helping us move forward in this uncertain, awful time.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Well, we appreciate your time today. Before we go, Martha, can you share with our audience where they can find you, your website, and where they can find your book?
Yes, I suggest marthamcphee.com, Martha, MCPHEE.com. Everything's there, all my great reviews, all of my books, links to bookstores, links to forthcoming events, and other things, a blog where I talk about the crazy chickens we're raising in the garden and growing, and other things, tips for students, and all the rest.
Perfect. Well, we'll let you get back to those chickens. We do thank you for your time, and thank everyone for joining us in Masterclass today. Be sure to tune in next time.
Thank you for
Martha.
having me. Ciao.
Absolutely.
Bye.